Raymond L.S. Patriarca is considered to be one of the most powerful dons in organized crime history. But in the late 1960s, a small crew of Italian hoods in his very own Federal Hill neighborhood began to disobey his orders. When diplomatic tactics didn't work, Raymond was forced to call on his soldiers. But these upstarts held their ground and didn't back down one bit. This is the story of the conflict that erupted in Providence, Rhode Island in the second half of the 1960s. What's up, everybody? Welcome back. So most people have heard of the Irish conflict in the 1960s in Boston that started between Somerville and Charlestown that spread throughout the entire city, but maybe not so well known is that almost as soon as the hostilities quieted down in Boston, a completely unrelated feud was beginning to the south in Providence, Rhode Island. The Don Raymond Patriarca was the most powerful man in the New England underworld, and his word was law. He had vast law enforcement contacts, political allies, interest in Las Vegas casinos. It was even rumored that Raymond held sway with the ruling commission of the five families in New York City. Raymond has always been considered one of the top LCN chieftains in the national syndicate. When the conflict in Boston was starting to affect the cash flow coming to Providence, Patriarca threatened to declare martial law and start releasing hit squads in the city to wipe everyone out. But when a local crew in Providence defied the Don's order to shut down a dice game, an all-out war almost erupted on the Providence streets. For a man that was considered to be one of the most powerful bosses in history, he was struggling to keep the peace in his own hometown. In 1966, the same year that the hostilities were beginning to die down in Boston, the problems were just beginning in Providence, Rhode Island. The 1960s were a very tumultuous time for the Don Raymond Patriarca. On top of the Boston conflict and the lost revenue from all the slangs, the FBI was all over him. Like his underboss Jerry Angiulo's headquarters Jay's Lounge in the combat zone in Boston, Raymond's Coinomatic office was also illegally bugged by the feds. They couldn't use what they heard as evidence in court because it was illegally obtained, but they sure learned a lot about the inner workings of Raymond's operation. The FBI was after Raymond and they weren't about to stop until they had him in a prison cell. Then later on in the decade, Joe Barbosa flipped along with Raymond's consigliere Henry Tomiello's driver Vincent Teresa. The Don must have felt like his world was being turned upside down. Witness protection program? Mobsters turning stoolies for the government against their fellow mobsters? It was unbelievable to a guy like Raymond. But the worst hit of all came in 1965 when Raymond's beloved wife Helen died of cancer. By all accounts, regardless of his criminal career and his ruthlessness on the streets, Raymond was a loving, loyal, and doting husband. While all this drama and chaos was ensuing in Raymond's world, a couple local Providence hoods were operating a small but lucrative dice game at the Veteran Social Club on 153 Atwells Avenue in Providence's Federal Hill neighborhood. This is the exact neighborhood and street that Raymond's Coinomatic was on. If you're not familiar with Providence, it's a really cool little city. It's much smaller than Boston, and unlike Boston, which had an Irish-American majority, Providence had a majority Italian-American population. The Federal Hill neighborhood has always been the heart of the Italian-American community in Providence, and Atwells Avenue is the main thoroughfare. You walk through the archway with the pineapples and you're there. I love Providence and Federal Hill. I used to go down and stay at the Marriott right across from the State House and then go to comedy shows at the Columbus Theater. It's an old theater that reminded me of the Orpheum in Boston, and it's located on Federal Hill. So two Federal Hill hoods, Willie Maffeo and Joe Scavone, were well known to Raymond and everyone else in the city of Providence. Like I said, it was a small city, and the underworld was even smaller. Raymond initially didn't have a problem with Maffeo or Scavone. That's until they decided to stop paying their tax on the dice game. In the years prior to the bad blood, Willie Maffeo was a close associate to one of Raymond's main guys, Rudolph Rudy Sciarra. Going all the way back to 1941, William Maffeo and Rudy Sciarra took a collar together for robbery. After the arrest, in order to avoid a prison sentence, Sciarra joined the military in World War II. After Rudy joined the service, William Maffeo teamed up with Rudy's brother Dante Sciarra to go commit crimes. William Maffeo was also there when Rudy Sciarra allegedly killed feared hitter Jackie the Mad Dog Nazarian in 1962. Jackie Nazarian, whose mother was Italian, and I think his dad was Armenian. I'm pretty sure Nazarian is an Armenian name, but it could be some sort of Middle Eastern, like Iranian. But he was one of Raymond's scariest hitters in the city of Providence. Because he was only half Italian, he wasn't made, but there's a legend that he was with Crazy Joe Gallo on the Albert Anastasia hit. The legend goes that New York contacted Raymond and asked him for help in eliminating the wayward boss, so he sent his mad dog down to New York to join Gallo. The two took out Anastasia while he sat in a barber's chair getting a shave at the Park Sheraton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. It's one of the most iconic mob hits of all time. Jackie Nazarian ended up getting delusions of grandeur in the early 1960s and began talking openly about taking the family over and pushing the Don out. Apparently, Raymond was dealing with some health problems, and I think his wife Helen was beginning to get sick as well. Raymond was a bit preoccupied, and Nazarian took this as weakness and decided to press the issue. The legend goes that in 1962, as Nazarian was going around Providence proclaiming that he was going to take over the family and push the Don out, he then ran into Rudy Sciarra and Willie Maffeo. Rudy Sciarra was now trying to become someone in the Patriarca organization and confronted Nazarian. As an altercation ensued between Sciarra and Nazarian, apparently Willie Maffeo tried to pull the two men apart. In the chaos, it's alleged that Sciarra blasted Nazarian, from which Jackie succumbed to his wounds. Rudy Sciarra was arrested for the crime. While he was waiting trial, Don Raymond gave him financial assistance. It was even said that Raymond thought about paying out of pocket for a ballistics expert to prove that Sciarra couldn't have done it. But that wasn't necessary. Sciarra was acquitted. Willie Maffeo was later charged for the crime, but he was also subsequently acquitted as well. So I'm not exactly sure what happened from that point on, but Maffeo and Sciarra, who had been friends and criminal partners off and on for about 2 decades, went in 2 very different ways. Sciarra would go on to become a main man in the Patriarca family, while Maffeo went in a completely opposite direction. After linking up with Joe Scavone and starting a dice game together, Willie Maffeo seems to have somewhere along the way developed a dislike for Raymond in the office. I'm not sure if something in particular happened, or perhaps Maffeo's ego just got too big. He decided he didn't have to pay Patriarca's tax anymore. Whatever the reasons, that's exactly what happened. They stopped paying. Raymond went down personally to the social club where they were running the game and told them to shut the game down. Maffeo openly defied the Don. This was not good. Raymond couldn't have someone right in his own backyard openly defying him. If word about this got around, it would make Raymond seem weak. This was a guy who was supposed to have an iron grip over the whole of New England. How was he going to let a couple local hoods running a dice game in his own neighborhood thumb their nose at him? It couldn't happen. The Rhode Island State Police were also getting sick of Maffeo's dice game as well, and his flagrant breaking of gambling laws, especially on Sundays. At this point, Rhode Island was still a very Catholic state. A state trooper even visited Raymond at the Coin-O-Matic to complain about the game to the Don. Raymond admitted he went down there and spoke to Willie personally, and that he was a real fresh SOB, and he wouldn't obey the Don. It was around this time that Joe Scavone was having some car trouble, so he brought his car to the mechanic to have it looked at. When the mechanic popped the hood, there was a bomb with dynamite rigged up to the engine. Luckily for Joe Scavone, it was never triggered. Scavone's father-in-law went to the Don Raymond Patriarca's office and asked him point blank if the Don was responsible. He assured him that he wasn't, and that he had outlawed the use of car bombs in Providence, so it couldn't be any of his guys. He assured him that his son-in-law was safe and that he meant him no harm. Meanwhile, the dice game on Atwell's Avenue was getting bigger, and Willie and Joe Scavone invited Willie's brother Rudolph Maffeo to join them. He bought into the game with a $2,500 initial stake. Rudolph Rudy Maffeo was mostly a booster. He didn't really have much to do with organized gambling up until he joined the dice game. Boosters are people that steal things and then resell them. I think they were mostly trying to build up their forces, seeing a pending altercation with the Don on the horizon. The Maffeos are a big family in Providence. I think there was like 5 or 6 brothers in total, and they were almost like a clan. And they were married into another big, large, notorious family called the Baccaris. They were also friendly with another large family called the Malays. Whatever the reason, this crew of Italian hoods from Providence didn't seem to fear the Don or his organization. They seemed to be openly wanting to fight with them. Perhaps the image of the Don Raymond as this all-powerful boss who controlled all of New England with an iron fist and held sway over the national syndicate, maybe this wasn't as accurate of a depiction as people might have believed after all. You ever notice that the shadow you cast on a wall is sometimes much bigger than you actually are? Perhaps Raymond just cast a really big shadow. Power can sometimes be an illusion. If you tell people you have the power, a lot of the times, you can make them believe it without actually having to exert force upon them. Before the hostilities erupted, Raymond's consigliere Henry Tomiello went to where the dice game was held on 153 Atwell's Avenue. Henry Tomiello was nicknamed the referee for his ability to work things out with words, and he always tried to use violence as a very last resort. But Willie Maffeo really pissed him off. When Henry told Willie Maffeo his dice game was over, Willie Maffeo told the respected consigliere to F off. Henry stepped up to Maffeo and stuck his finger in Willie's face. "The game is to be shut down immediately. Do you understand?" To that, Maffeo stiff-armed the older man in the face and pushed him a few feet back. Tomiello was stunned. No one put their hands on him. This was a death sentence. He went back to the Coinomatic office, still shaking in anger. He told the Don if he had a piece on him, when Maffeo touched him, he would have killed him right there on the spot. This had gone way too far. Raymond had to take action. These upstarts wouldn't heed the Don's words, and now he would have to use force. You would really think that one of the supposedly most powerful mob bosses in the country should have no problem getting some two-bit hoods in his own backyard to heed his words. But he had a problem, a big one. In 1966, bodies began to drop in Rhode Island as a result of this feud. Two allies of Maffeo and Scavone were discovered by authorities killed in similar fashions. Earl Bassett, who had been reporting missing for 2 weeks, was discovered in Johnston, Rhode Island with multiple wounds to his face. Edward Caseo was found with a hole in his head sitting in his parked car behind a dairy store on Atwells Avenue. Raymond had 2 of his younger, more capable guys leading the charge against Maffeo and Scavone's crew. 2 of the biggest up-and-coming mobsters in Providence's Patriarca family were Luigi Baby Shax Minacchio and Rudy Sciarra. They would both become made men, and Baby Shax would one day even go on to become the boss of the family, but that was much later. Baby Shax and Rudy had their own crew of mob associates as well. This included Dickie Collet, Robert Fairbrothers, who was half Italian on his mom's side, and Johnny Rossi. Johnny Rossi came from a notorious criminal family in the city of Providence. His father was Alfredo the Blind Pig Rossi, who was one of the biggest fences of stolen goods in the state of Rhode Island. His brother Joseph was also involved in the life, and he was an associate of this crew as well. He unfortunately ended up dying of an alleged narcotics overdose. Willie Maffeo was the main instigator in this whole situation, so Raymond realized that he was their most important target. After the other 2 bodies dropped in February and March, they set their sights on him. Henry Tamiello suggested that they bring in Joe Barbosa, who had racked up an estimated 26 bodies or something ludicrous like that in the conflict in Boston. This was common practice for Raymond. He liked to farm out work to other people. He wasn't a fan of using his own resources to do jobs like this. And honestly, I don't think Raymond had his own personal team of killers. Don't get me wrong, there was plenty of dangerous men in Providence with the likes of Jerry we met, and before he passed, Raymond had Jackie Nazarian. But as far as made men in his family, I don't think he had more than a couple real killers. It was rumored that Raymond even called for the services of a young Greg Scarpa, aka the Grim Reaper from New York City. But Henry Tamiello had gotten tight with Joe Barbosa from the time he had spent at the Ebb Tide Lounge in Revere Beach, which was every Boston wise guy's favorite hangout. Henry told Raymond that this was the guy for the job. Raymond and Henry met with Joe at the office of the Coinomatic and discussed the Willie Maffeo contract with the animal. After meeting with Barbosa, the 2 decided his services weren't going to be needed. Seemingly untroubled, Barbosa shrugged it off, but the decision to discuss the hit with Barbosa would come back to haunt Patriarca and Tamiello in a big way in the future. At this point, the Rhode Island State Police would take Willie Maffeo under protective custody, realizing that Patriarca and his crew were after him, but they eventually released him. The office had received information that Willie Maffeo was going across the street from his social club on 153 Atwells Avenue to the Corner Kitchen Diner at 11 a.m., where he would have coffee and pastry with the owner and some other men every day. At 11 a.m. on July 13, 1966, just like he did every other day, Willie Maffeo went to the Corner Kitchen for his coffee and pastry. A few minutes after sitting down, a masked man entered the diner brandishing a weapon. He ordered everyone on the floor except Maffeo. He said, "No, not you. You come with me." The masked man led Maffeo outside to a phone booth. He demanded his bankroll. Maffeo claimed he didn't have his bag on him. He made Maffeo enter the phone booth and then proceeded to fill him up with lead. Raymond's main nemesis in his hometown was gone, but this feud was far from over. In reality, it was only beginning. Rudy Sciarra was tried for Willie Maffeo's death but was acquitted. To this day, the crime remains unsolved. This is when the conflict would really start to heat up. On July 29th, a few weeks after his brother's death, Willie's brother Rudy Maffeo's Federal Hill apartment was set on fire. The very next day, on July 30th, 1966, Willie and Rudy's nephew, future notorious thief Joseph Maffeo, was hit staying in Rudy's driveway. He survived the attack, though. A month later, on August 7th, 1966, Rudy's brother-in-law, Joe Buffy Bakari, along with 2 of his sons, blasted at Rudy while he sat in his apartment one night. He was shook up, but he wasn't physically hurt. I'm not exactly sure what caused the rift between Rudy and his brother-in-law, Buffy. I think it might have been something personal, like a family issue, and nothing to do with the Patriarca beef, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Rudy was probably beginning to think that he couldn't feel any more unsafe in his Federal Hill apartment by the end of the 1966 summer, but then tragedy struck at his residence when 18-year-old Frank Melee Jr. was killed on October 6, staying directly in front of Rudy's place. Raymond's underlings were definitely putting the pressure on Rudy Maffeo. He most likely didn't get a moment's peace during the onslaught. Then on November 11th, Maffeo associate Angelo De Palma was also whacked. At this point, things were looking pretty bleak for Rudy Maffeo. He had kind of inherited this beef from his brother Willie, and now that he was gone, all the ire of Don Raymond and his soldiers were directed at him. Then in 1967, the fortunes in this conflict began to shift a little bit. Joe Barbosa, the infamous hitman turned government cooperator, was now on a personal crusade to lock up every single member of the LCN that he could. He implicated Raymond and his consigliere in the plot to kill Willie Maffeo, and on June 20th, 1967, Raymond was arrested for conspiracy. It was the Don's first caller in almost 20 years. He bailed out the very next day for $25,000. The police caught up with Tamiello on Route 1 in Massachusetts, where he was coming out of a hotel with a very attractive young woman in Wakefield. Whether it was purely by coincidence or it was Joe Scavone felt emboldened by Raymond's arrest, the very next day he got into a firefight with Patriarca associates Dickie Collet and Robert Fairbrother, but no one was hit. A few months later in November, Scavone had a little bit more luck. This time he caught Luigi Babyshanks Minacchio on Federal Hill and he hit him in the neck. Luckily, Raymond's trusted soldier survived the attack, but the crew was now on alert. The hunters had become the hunted. Flower shop on Atwells Avenue had their windows smashed as a result of the attack on Baby Shacks. Scavone would end up getting arrested for the attack, but the charges were later dropped. There was always rumors in the underworld that Scavone had a special relationship with the Rhode Island State Police, especially Colonel Walter Stone. Joe Maffeo, Rudy and Willie's nephew, had his Johnson, Rhode Island house targeted in a drive-by, and on the same day his son's car was attacked. Because of the brazenness of all these attacks, Colonel Walter Stone of the Rhode Island State Police ordered the following men under constant surveillance: Louis Minacchio, Rudy Sciarra, Robert Fairbanks, Dickie Collet, Johnny Rossi, Raymond Patriarca, and basically anybody that was a player on Federal Hill. While all this was transpiring, Raymond was looking for Rudy Maffeo himself, but it wasn't to cause him violence. Raymond wanted Rudy to testify on his behalf and say that he had absolutely nothing to do with his brother Willie's death. He even went to visit Maffeo at his Johnson, Rhode Island house. Apparently, Maffeo ditched his cursed Atwells Avenue apartment. Raymond offered to end the hostilities and give him some sort of financial incentive as well. Rudy told the Don that he would think about it. While Raymond was at Maffeo's, he noticed he had a new guy with him. Anthony Melee was a tough Providence hood who was a relative of Frank Melee Sr. and the deceased Frank Melee Jr. Once Luigi Babyshanks Minacchio had healed up from his wounds, he got his crew back together and went hunting for Joe Scavone. Obviously, Babyshanks wanted revenge for getting hit in the neck, but beyond that, Scavone needed to go. He was a problem. On April 12, 1968, Babyshanks, Rudy Sciarra, Dickie Collet, and Johnny Rossi were at Robert Bobby Almonte's social club on Atwells Avenue waiting for Scavone to show up. As soon as they saw him, they were set to pounce, but unfortunately for them, the police discovered them before they found Joe Scavone. Apparently, someone from inside Almonte's club had called the police and tipped them off. I'm not exactly sure who it was, but someone from the inside foiled their plans. All the men were arrested, but were later acquitted. Now, Raymond was very preoccupied with his case for the conspiracy to kill Willie Maffeo. Plus, Joe Barbosa was wreaking havoc on the Boston faction as well with his mostly perjured testimony. He was replacing all the actual culprits for Teddy Deegan's death and replacing them with Boston LCN figures he didn't like or had issues with. Even though the Don had a lot on his plate, he still wanted to eliminate Rudy Maffeo. They had Maffeo and Scavone backed into a corner, but if he let them live, they could come back at him in the future. Plus, if he would go away for the Willie Maffeo's death, Raymond thought without him on the street, the two might become emboldened once again and stop making moves. Raymond again looked outside the city of Providence for help with this endeavor. He sought out legendary armed robber John Red Kelly and his protege, who was quickly becoming one of the most feared men in the New England underworld, Maurice Pro Lerner. It's kind of funny, I was actually originally writing a script this week for a video about Pro Lerner, and I was about 10 pages in, and I decided just to do a little YouTube search on his name. Seems about a year and a half ago, someone else did his story, and I really don't like repeating stuff that's already out there on YouTube. I would have presented it differently, and if you guys still want to see it, the script's partially written, so it wouldn't be hard to put out. For you that don't already know his story, Maurice Pro Lerner was a Jewish kid from Brookline, Mass., which is a nice city directly west of Boston. He played semi-pro baseball and was a gifted natural athlete. He had an opportunity to play at the major league level, but instead chose a life of crime. Besides his natural athletic ability, he had an above-average IQ as well. Some say his nickname Pro is actually short for Professor. He was also extremely violent. Even feared criminals were afraid of him. John Red Kelly, one of the most notorious stick-up men of all time, said in his nearly 3-decade criminal career, Pro Lerner was the scariest guy he ever met. I'm definitely going to do more content on Red Kelly and the infamous Plymouth mail truck heist, so I'm not going to talk too much about that right now, but I just wanted to give you guys like a little general history about Red and Pro's relationship. They hooked up in the early 1960s and started committing crimes together. Raymond had gotten a tip that Rudy Maffeo and Anthony Melee were going to Panoni's Market in Providence every Saturday for their weekly grocery shopping trip. This was obviously their best chance to get the duo who had been laying low recently. Jack Red Kelly and Pro Lerner came down to Providence and teamed up with Patriarca's crew that had been previously hunting the opposition. On April 20th, 1968, the Saturday after Easter, just after 3 p.m., Rudy Maffeo and Anthony Melee were spotted entering Pannoni's Market. Moments later, a dark sedan came flying up to the store. Two men wearing Halloween masks jumped out of the car and entered the market. Within seconds, their first target, Rudy Maffeo, was hit at very close range. The blast tore his side open. He fell on the floor holding his unused weapon. Anthony Melee, who was backing away from his attackers, was hit from 6 feet away in the face and fell into a dairy cooler. The attackers fled the market in a matter of moments, hopped into a car which sped away from the scene. Two men lay dead in front of horrified store employees. It was a perfectly executed hit. The hit team allegedly rendezvoused at a hotel later and celebrated their successful mission. Pro Learner allegedly said, "Man, I thought you were the best driver I'd ever seen," directed at Red Kelly. "But I've never seen anyone pull up and speed off from a scene like you," pointing at Johnny Rossi. To which Rossi replied, "I ain't never seen anyone hop out of a car the way you did." Pro Learner's athletic prowess was certainly stuff of legend, and the way he moved on hits only added to his aura. Obviously, Raymond was very happy with these results. Both Maffeo brothers were dead, and Joe Scavone was hiding underneath a rock somewhere. The Don had shut down this rebellion in his own backyard, it would seem, but the consequences of this feud would continue to haunt Raymond and Patriarca for years to come. The celebration was short-lived when in 1969 he began serving a 10-year sentence for conspiracy to kill Willie Maffeo. He and his consigliere were caught up in the conspiracy, but Henry Tamiello had bigger problems. He was sentenced to death in the trial for Teddy Deegan, a crime that the man had absolutely nothing to do with. With Raymond Patriarca and Henry Tamiello in the can, the power base switched to Boston. Jerry Angulo basically became the acting boss on the streets while Raymond was away. I talked about this in my last video about how Angulo built up his power base in the 1960s, and by the time the 70s came around, he was the one with the power. Boston was a much bigger city than Providence, and Angulo was a great businessman. He was making money hand over fist, and with guys like Larry Bayonne, J.R. Russo, and younger guys like Vincent Ferrara coming up in the ranks, the North End was strong. When with their alliance to the deadly Winter Hill crew, no one could really mess with Boston. Raymond was always the glue that held the family together. He was the power in Providence, and it was solely because of him that that place was the New England mob's capital. Boston was a much bigger city and a stronger outfit in reality, especially by the 1970s. Raymond would remain the Don in name, but he never really recovered from getting locked up for the Willie Maffeo hit. He eventually died in 1984, and with Jerry Angulo going away for Rico, his son Junior Patriarca tried to fill his dad's shoes. But he was not his father, and it did not last very long. John Red Kelly would later get caught for a big job where he took down an armored Brinks truck for like 150 grand. He went on to become state's evidence and testified against all his fellow co-conspirators in the Rudy Maffeo Anthony Melee hit. All the parties involved were indicted and tried. Luigi Baby Shack's Minacchio would end up going on the lam and traveling as far as France and Venezuela. He was eventually caught in New York City in 1979, 10 years later. Maurice Pro Learner, Red Kelly's protege and friend, received a life sentence for his role in the crime. Decades later, it would come out that Kelly perjured himself and he said it was at the prodding of the FBI. But he admitted he lied and the convictions were overturned. A few days before Christmas in 1988, at 53 years old, Maurice Pro Learner was released from prison and rejoined his wife and 2 children. He would later be stricken by Alzheimer's and died as a result. It's a shame. I'm sure he would have some crazy stories to tell, but I don't think Pro Learner was the talking type. Joe Scavone, the only remaining member of the opposition crew, was killed in his driveway in 1974. Charles Flynn and the notorious hood Ralph DeMasi were charged with the crime but were later acquitted. Other legendary Rhode Island mobsters Jerry Tillinghast and Jerry Ouimet were also considered to be part of the crime. So this conflict, which is much less discussed than the one in Boston in the 1960s, was the end of an era in Providence and really the New England underworld as a whole. This was the end of Raymond L.S. Patriarca's run as one of the most memorable dons in American history. The Pax Patriarca, a peace that lasted over a decade from when he took power in the early 1950s, was shattered in the mid-1960s. I think it reflects the changing times in the New England underworld where the younger generation of criminals weren't respecting the rules of the old guard. The image of Don Raymond as this all-powerful boss was tested by Maffeo and Scavone's crew. They ultimately paid the price for this, but they gave him one hell of a fight, and the family was never the same again after. I made a video about the Maffeos and Raymond's problem a long time ago, but I didn't discuss the wider conflict and all the players involved. I thought it was an interesting enough story to revisit and cover much more in depth, because like I said, this is a conflict I don't think a lot of people were aware of. If you like this video, go ahead and crush that like button. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Big shout out to my boy Dossier Dave for his help with this video as well. But you guys know the deal. The most important thing, make good choices, make good decisions, take good care of yourself, your family, your friends, your fellow human beings. Try to have a good day, guys.
I'll talk to you real soon. God bless.